Hey everyone, I'm Kai Chimura, the host of Soccerpedia. For this episode, I am very excited and happy to have Jason Longshore be a guest on this show. He is a color commentator for Atlanta United on radio station 92.9 The Game. And so for this episode, we're just going to discuss a lot about the history of soccer in Atlanta, primarily with Atlanta Silverbacks. And of course, we'll dive into some discussion about Atlanta United as well. So without further ado, enjoy the show. That's awesome. Now we finally sorted out our technological issues for the meantime.
I mean, it's the weirdest thing. I went to the web app and did it there instead of using the separate app. So it went through that way. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, we are here. So how's it going?
Good, man. Does everything sound okay?
Yeah, everything sounds perfect. Everything good on my end too?
Yeah. Yep. All good.
Great. Yeah, for this episode, I just wanted to just talk a little bit about just Atlanta soccer history in general. I just wanted to focus more on Atlanta Silverbacks because I know that you are an encyclopedia of wealth and knowledge on soccer in this city. And so, yeah, so let's just start off with like the history of Silverbacks, what you know, and what kind of its overall timeline and how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, so I worked for the Atlanta Ruckus, which was the precursor to the Silverbacks. They started in 1995. I went to all the games in 95 except for the day that I graduated high school, and I think one other game I missed. And then in 1996, the owner pulled out of the team. They operated under league management for a little while. Eventually found new owners late in the season, and that's also the year that the A-League merged with the USISL and created the bigger A-League that had 24 teams in it. So 97, they moved to Roswell, and they played at the old Roswell High School. I was in college at the University of Georgia and connected with the general manager. He brought me on to write press releases, write stories about the team, and then I ended up over the summer becoming the director of media relations. Well, things were not great with the team in terms of the finances, and I mean, this was kind of typical at this time in the late 90s as teams would kind of come and go. The rest of the front office left, and I was running the team from my apartment in Athens between the 97 and start of the 98 seasons. And eventually, after multiple checks bounced, I left, and the league ended up taking the team over a couple weeks later when the owner at the time refused to send the team on a road trip. So they revoked his license, couldn't operate the franchise anymore. League was running it again. This is the second time in 2 years. And the first group that was under the Silverbacks name bought the team at the very end of the 1998 season, John Latham and Bobby Glustrom. And I was still operating things at that time. I'd become the director of operations essentially by default and was just trying to keep the team afloat until somebody came in to buy it. And luckily they did at the end of that season. They announced that Silverbacks would be the name. In honor of Willie B, the gorilla at Zoo Atlanta. So there was a lot of promise. The first year of the Silverbacks in 1999, they brought in a lot of people in the front office that had not been connected with the team previously. They were kind of standoffish. It was kind of a weird situation. And I was disconnected from the team because I was in Athens, and they didn't really make any effort to connect to people like me who had been involved in running the team before. And the front office changed over a lot in those early years. Boris Strakunica came in and bought into the team. I believe he bought Bobby Glustrom's ownership out, bought part of John Latham's ownership, and he became the primary owner, and he's the one that's most associated with the Silverbacks. This is the early 2000s, and then as you got into 2004, 2005, the team was up and down. Didn't really have a whole lot of strong seasons at the time. They had an Open Cup match with Kansas City Wizards at DeKalb Memorial Stadium. I remember going to that, and you started to hear whispers about a facility being built, and DeKalb Memorial wasn't the long-term future. It had a lot of limitations, and 2006 is when Silverbacks Park opened. And I think we all remember what the designs looked like, what the plans were for the full implementation of what Silverbacks Park would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time, the end of the 2008 season, the team went on hiatus. And essentially the hiatus was another word for folding. I mean, there was no plan on them coming back. And when they came back in the North American Soccer League, it was because Traffic Sports had the finances to bring them back, and they needed an eighth team to finish the league out. And Aaron Davidson had connections with Boris from Emory University, and knew that he had a facility, knew that he had a brand, knew that he could get a team up and running quickly if it was financed, and it was. And it went through a bunch of permutations. I mean, you had changes in management, you had changes in coaches. It felt like every year there was a question on if it was coming back. Looked pretty promising by the time you got to 2013, because you had Soccer Bowl here when they won the shortened spring season. Eric Winaldo was involved as the technical director. 2014 was an epic U.S. Open Cup run. But at the end of 2014, Boris and local partners had bought out Traffic Sports, and then that was going into the 2014 season. By the end of the 2014 season, they didn't want to operate the team anymore, and the league funded it for 2015. And when push came to shove to fund it again for 2016, the league owners didn't have the finances to do it. They balked, and that was ultimately where the professional team ended. There was a team that continued on under the Silverbacks brand, but that was a NPSL team that was actually a team that I helped start called Atlanta FC. We partnered with the Silverbacks when they came back in the NASL to be the Atlanta Silverbacks Reserves. And when the pro team folded, there wasn't really a point of being a reserve team, so they changed the name to be the Silverbacks. But that was a separate franchise altogether. That had nothing to do with the professional version.
And do you think, do you know exactly what was the reasoning behind Boris not wanting to have the Silverbacks team exist?
When he wanted out in 2014, at the end of 2014?
Yes.
Just down to money. I mean, honestly, Boris was part of the group that led to the North American Soccer League forming. He went on hiatus with the Silverbacks at the end of 2008. 2009, you had a lot of friction in USL. 2010 was when you had the U.S. Soccer Federation run a second division that had an NASL division and a USL division. But Boris was always on the side of the NASL folks, and the Traffic connection and Aaron Davidson connection made a bunch of sense. But while Traffic was funding it, it made sense. When it was Boris on his own with a local partner, and one of the reasons they had to buy Traffic out was U.S. Soccer. By this time, you'd had the issues with Traffic, with the worldwide issues with FIFA, but also you didn't want a situation with one entity owning a bunch of teams. And Traffic had a bunch of teams at the time. They had, I always forget the order and everything went. I think U.S. Soccer and the NASL pushed to sell before the FIFA stuff really broke. But Traffic had the team that I believe at this time had returned into Fort Lauderdale. They weren't Miami FC anymore. They also had the Carolina Railhawks at the time. And they had a share in Minnesota at the time, as everybody did. So they had to sell. Boris bought them out. And I know going into 2014, there was a lot of high hopes for what was going to happen with the new local partner coming on. By the end of that season, the financials were obvious. It wasn't viable at that point. And it's one of those things that when the team was going to come back ahead of 2011, it was December when they were announced as coming back of 2010. We had some meetings with fans, with the Westside 109 group, with some local reporters, with the Latino community. And there was a push at that time to change the name because a lot of people felt like the name was associated with negative connotations in the soccer community. And they didn't want to do it. Boris didn't want to do it. They eventually opted not to. I wonder how things might have went if that had been the case. I don't know if that would have fixed everything. I mean, the big picture thing is the league that they were in, the NASL, never took off. It was poorly managed from the very early days. They set a high standard for what they expected from teams, but teams couldn't meet even the lower standard that the third division was operating on at the time. So it was just always up in the air, and there was never any consistency. And it's always hard in a city like Atlanta for anybody. And Boris put a lot of money into it. Boris put a lot of his time and energy into making this work, but it's very hard to be a second tier team in a major league city. It's a very difficult sell. And I think you have to find a way to localize your audience, and the Silverbacks never accomplished that.
Mm. And when the rumors went around 2000 early 2010s, like 2012, 13, that MLS may come to Atlanta, was there any do you think there was ever any discussion between Arthur Blank and Boris between trying to combine in a way, or they completely went their separate ways and never even considered to?
I don't know. I never heard anything that there was definitely any conversations. It would not have helped the MLS brand to come in as the Silverbacks. I know the Silverbacks had a hardcore following, but it was small, and it wasn't going to translate past that, I don't think. And I think there was, in the soccer community, a little bit of a negative vibe around it, and it's a shame. And that's down to the way it had been run, not just at that point, but going back to the earlier, incarnations of the team. It just never got over being small. And I think one of the things that Atlanta United has succeeded with is it's always felt very big. It's always been portrayed as a big deal, as a major league team. Arthur Blank has always positioned it next to the Atlanta Falcons. It's never been treated secondary. And it's not that Boris treated the Atlanta Silverbacks as a secondary brand. It's just that it was, because it wasn't in the biggest league. It wasn't in the biggest stadium. It was smaller. And there was never that ability to get past that. I don't know if any conversations were had. I mean, there's always been rumors about it. I don't think it would have made any sense. I think you kind of needed a new brand. And the funny thing to me about it is one of the suggestions that came from one of the leading Latino journalists at the time, when we had those meetings with Aaron Davidson, with Fernando Clavijo from Traffic, with Boris, with Michael Oakey, who was running the team at the time. One of the suggestions was change the name and change it to Atlanta United, because this is an opportunity to truly unite the city behind a team. And it's something the Silverbacks never did. And that was suggested in December of 2010. And it's kind of funny, if that had happened, what would have happened down the road? I don't know, but it wouldn't have fixed it by itself, but the name wouldn't have brought any value to MLS. I think the only older names or outside names that you're seeing MLS teams have value with are much older, like your Seattle Sounders, your Portland Timbers, your San Jose Earthquakes. I just don't think it would have worked. And I think ultimately Arthur made the right decision.
And do you think, like, if they were, like, let's say, usually when teams, I feel like there's several MLS teams that already have that United name in there. And historically speaking, usually when teams have the name United, it means that they merged with another club. So I was wondering, like, why why was the MLS team in Atlanta United? Was there ever any other names that were in consideration?
Not that I ever heard officially. There was a lot of talk around the time that it was starting to become obvious that MLS was going to come to town. I want to say summer of 2013. Reporters nationally said they had heard that the team would be called the Atlanta Talons, and that was probably based off of Falcons and the talon of the bird. I don't know if it would have worked or not. It's kind of funny. I always felt like going into it, they needed a nickname. They needed a traditional American sports name, and that would have worked better here. But I was working for Soccer in the Streets at the time when Atlanta United was named, and I'll always remember a conversation I had with one of our local partners where we were introducing soccer programs. It was an area that had no soccer history in the west side of Atlanta. And the guy who ran the program said, I love the name because it sounds like a soccer team.
Hmm.
And I think for us in the game, we know the connotations of United typically, and what it means. But for somebody new, and that's something Atlanta United's done really well with, is they have grown the game and grown it to new fans. It sounds like a soccer team, and it does. And there's a Minnesota United, there's DC United, yeah, and there's a bunch of Uniteds in England, and there's a bunch of Uniteds in a lot of leagues. It's worked, and I think what Atlanta United's done with it to take it past the soccer connotation of two clubs coming together and merging, and taking it to bringing a city together, bringing groups of people together. They've succeeded in that. They made the branding work. I do think MLS needs to start looking at being a little more creative with the names. You're getting to a point where now it's went maybe a little too far towards the traditional, away from the old, Kansas City Wizards and San Jose Clash and stuff like that. But it's, Nashville SC, FC Dallas, Toronto FC, a little more variety, or nicknames forming around it. Something in between, I think, is a better step for us.
Yeah. Because currently right now there's 26 MLS teams, and there's 4 more that have been given franchise within the next 2 seasons. And do you think after those 4 teams, I think it's Austin, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, Sacramento, and then St. Louis, Missouri, they're all getting MLS teams. And so that will be 30 teams by 2022. And do you think that 30 teams, that's the cutoff point for any other city to even consider, let's say, I don't know, a Milwaukee or something, to be like, hey, I want an MLS team too? Do you think that 30 teams going to be the cutoff before, it starts to dilute the
I don't know. I think the worldwide nature of the game, you can avoid diluting the talent. I think the thing that has to go alongside of that, because you can go out and spend and not spend crazy money and put a good product on the field now. I mean, we've seen it in Atlanta. We've seen it in other new teams that have been good fairly quickly. It can be done, but you have to develop talent alongside of it. And it's something that does take time. I think people have been maybe a little unrealistic about how fast you develop talent. New York City, who started 2 years before Atlanta, is now starting to have a couple players come through. And one will be going to Germany next year. James Sands is being said by his coach that he'll go to Europe very soon. He's 17, 18 years old. It's an inexact science, but if you're gonna have we're gonna start a team, we're gonna be good quick, we're gonna spend the money to do it. Alongside that, you've got to have the long-term play of developing talent to make it all hold up. Long-term for the league, I mean, the U.S. is different. I know a lot of people have pointed at, first division has to be 20 teams. Who says? I mean, because other countries do it, other countries are smaller. It's a different conversation here all the way around. You can do it differently. And I think a lot of leagues are going to look at different things coming out of this coronavirus pandemic, because the financials are going to be different. You're going to have potentially different calendars because everybody's figuring this out as we go. For MLS, I think the next question once you get to 30 is, are you going to look at your own second division? And I don't know if they ever will or not. I don't know if maybe that's all changed because of this, because, I mean, the numbers are out there no matter what level you're at. Everybody's losing revenue right now. MLS is going to lose a lot of money. Don Garber said up to $1 billion. When you start to do the math team by team and how much of their money comes from game day revenue, it's not a crazy figure to think about. USL Championship, USL League One, NISA, NPSL, everybody.
Yeah.
You make the majority of your money through game day, and that's gone. So I think the idea of getting to 30 and then stopping and then maybe re-examining what you do down the road, that was pre-COVID-19. Now it's impossible to tell, because what the financials look like for teams next year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, it's impossible to guess right now.
All right. Yeah, I was going to ask, if the trajectory, for example, for Atlanta United, where, like before the coronavirus, like where did you see Atlanta United, or where do you see them 5, 10 years time?
I think the goal is to be the biggest club in this hemisphere, and that would be, South America, Central America, North America, and they've been trending in that direction. When you look at what they've done since 2017, the attendance, it's better than anybody ever expected. The revenues have gone alongside of that. The ability to go out and bring in, high quality players like a Miguel Almiron, a Joseph Martinez, a Pity Martinez, and Ezequiel Barco. You're bringing in talent who is top notch. You're also showing that in Miguel's case, you can sell them on for a huge profit to a huge club in Newcastle United. I think that was where it was going. And, it's funny. I don't think that's changed because everybody's being affected by this. I think Brazil financially will maybe take the biggest hit in this hemisphere. And Brazil was the strongest. They were the one that I think was in the best position coming into the coronavirus outbreak. Mexico was ahead of MLS. Top clubs in Argentina were ahead of MLS. I think MLS could bounce back quicker because of the way they're structured with the single entity. They might actually come out of this in 2 or 3 years further ahead than they would have been, which is a crazy thing to think about. I think that's a big part of why they found a way to get back on the field this year. They needed to play and create the momentum and create that opportunity to bounce back as fast as possible.
And for a long time, when MLS first started, and several years after that, there's really no teams that were pretty much focused in on the South. Of course, you had Miami Fusion, and then you had the Tampa Mutiny, and so of course those teams folded, and now you have Orlando, you have Inter Miami FC, and where do you see, let's say, for example, Inter Miami as a team moving forward if they already had a team in that city 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's weird. It's hard to compare those early days of MLS because when that team started, the owner investor who came in and put the money in really didn't have a real plan. They were originally going to play at the Orange Bowl, the Fusion, and when that all fell through, they had to go to Fort Lauderdale, but they were a Miami team in Fort Lauderdale. That didn't really go over all that well. The league was also struggling at that time. You had Tampa Bay that was run by the league. You had losses piling up early on, and they ended up having to make the decision to fold both Tampa Bay and Miami at that time. That was 2001. The game's in such a different place now. And I think having the type of ownership that they have in Miami too, you've got one of the richest people in the world from Japan as part of that ownership group. You have David Beckham and his celebrity as part of that ownership group. You have other really solid local contributors like the Moss brothers. So it's a pretty organized group, and that's going to help them a ton. Before it wasn't that. It was one guy, and his finances took a hit. And I don't think they really had the plan. Miami, you could say the same in some ways, but I think they've tried to do things right with Miami politics. And Miami politics are brutal. Fusion ran into it. Inter Miami's running into it. And again, we don't know how it changes. Maybe coming out the other side of this, the city is more willing to work with somebody who's going to develop a part of town that wouldn't be developed otherwise. The area, the golf course that they've identified to build a stadium at, there are issues with the soil, and it's going to take somebody to come in with this kind of money to ever do anything in that area. Maybe the city's more willing to do it now because they need the money. Things are going to change, and that's what's hard to feel about this. I think soccer in the South, though, it's something I've always said about Atlanta to people from the outside. What the Silverbacks did, even though as a club, as a business, they were ultimately not successful, they planted a lot of seeds.
Yes.
They took advantage of seeds that had been planted by the Ruckus. The Ruckus took advantage of seeds that had been planted by the Atlanta Attack, the indoor team. They took advantage of seeds that had been planted by the Georgia Generals and then the Atlanta Chiefs. And it all built on itself, and it got further and further and further along, but you needed the right people to do it the right way to take advantage of that.
Mm.
And that's where I feel like Atlanta has shown there's a way to do that, but Nashville happened because of Atlanta.
Mm.
You know, the Birmingham Legion in the USL Championship happened because of what's happened in Atlanta and the success of Atlanta United. Memphis is happening there. You know, everything going on in Chattanooga is in some ways related to Atlanta, but in some ways the seeds that Chattanooga FC have planted have really helped them grow and accelerate things. You have a pro team in Greenville, South Carolina. You have
Yeah.
the Charleston Battery, who've been around forever. You have MLS coming to Charlotte. You know, I mean, you have a team in Statesboro, Georgia, that's building a stadium. You know, like all this has grown over that time. All the things that came before helped it happen, and the right people have to come in at the right time and take advantage of that, and take advantage of those seeds that are now starting to bloom.
All right. Yeah. And so right now you're you're with 92.9 The Game, and so whenever, let's say, Atlanta United, they have away games, do you also travel with the team as well?
Yeah, we do. We travel for all the away games. We traveled for CONCACAF Champions League. The last game we called was at the Estadio Azteca against Club America as the coronavirus outbreak was happening in the NBA. It was a surreal night because I've always wanted to go to the Azteca, and I'm a huge fan since I was a kid, and Diego Maradona was my hero, and that was where he lifted a World Cup. So I was just so thrilled to be there. But we also knew that, you know, as that night went on, it was getting pretty obvious that all the leagues were going to stop. So it was just a weird night. Going on the road, seeing this league grow and seeing everything that Atlanta's doing in the league, but also Portland and also Seattle. And we were really looking forward to going to Minnesota this year to see their new stadium. Montreal is one of my favorite places in the league. I love what the Impact have done with their history, and I love their stadium. It's really cool to see it as somebody who, you know, was in it when MLS started here in Atlanta, working at a high school stadium, and then seeing the Silverbacks move to building their own place, but they couldn't see it through. And now to see, I think, what we all hoped for, you know, back then, and to see it all come, and it's a big deal, and it's treated as such. It's amazing.
Yeah. What's viewership like for the radio station? Like, how many viewers does the Atlanta United broadcast have per game usually?
It's been a huge thing for the station. We don't always get the number straight up. I don't, but the ratings have been great for the station. And since Atlanta United came to the station, the ratings for the station as a whole are way up. Last fall, during the end of the season and the playoff run in October, the ratings for 92.9 The Game were higher than they've ever been in their history. And it's not like the Falcons were driving those ratings last year. So Atlanta United's been really big, and I've seen it from people who listen to my podcast, Soccer Down Here, and now listen to the radio station and listen when soccer's not on. But I think what they've done really well is all of the hosts have been really open to talking about it. They've had, you know, me on, but they've had players on. They've had Darren Eales on. They've had Frank DeBoer on. They've treated it like they treat the Falcons. They've treated it like they treat the Hawks. And Atlanta United's become an integral part of the station, and to the point that, you know, again, it's right there with the Hawks and the Falcons as, you know, a major property for the station. Sponsors are coming on board because of the ratings. The ratings for the overall station have been great. You have to expect that the ratings for the games have been great as well.
Nice. That's really cool and really great that you're just like able to just have so many different interactions. You and your station with so many, you know, people from different backgrounds, and that's just got to be a really neat experience just overall.
Yeah. I love it because the way that it's gone for me, I was always that guy, you know, a lot like you, who's out talking to people and saying, hey, come to the game with me. Hey, come see this team. You know, this is going to be fun. You'll have a good time, and explaining it. And now I get to do that on the radio to people who, some are hardcore fans and have teams in Europe that they are fans of, or followed the game in Mexico or South America for a long time, and they're really knowledgeable. But also, we have people who listen to a soccer game for the first time every time we do a game. And that's a huge part of it, is being able to keep everybody engaged and entertained. I don't want to talk over people's head, and I don't want to talk down to people. So for me, it's all about growing the game and bringing more people to the party. And having a station like 92.9 that's as big as it is and as powerful as it is has been a huge help for growing the game in this city.
What's the most difficult part about being a sports commentator on a radio station?
I think the biggest thing in game is just being ready for anything, because in a match you never know what's going to happen. If somebody gets injured early, you got to know who the possible subs could be. You've got to pick up if there's a change in the tactics, a change in the shape. You've got to know all the storylines that you could possibly need to know for a game. It's like a final exam. You don't know what the questions are going to be, but you have to know everything that could come up on it. So the preparation, the studying, it's intense. It's a lot. In the game, talking about it, and then I guess for me, it's being able to lose yourself in it a little bit, because it is entertaining. It is entertainment. It is, something that people listen and they don't want to be bored. They don't want to have somebody who's not passionate about it. They want to be engaged. They want to feel like they're sitting there with you watching the game. So you've got to kind of get lost in the moment and throw yourself into it and not think about the things around you and the people around you. You've got to feel like you're connecting with the people out there listening and drawing them in. So it's a challenge, and I always try to get better at it. You just always trying to find new ways to do it and get better. I don't think any announcer knows what they're doing game one, or I don't think any announcer gets to a point in their career that they're not learning something new. I think you have to stay on top of your job.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I started this podcast, Soccerpedia, a couple months ago, and it's just been, I've learned a lot. It's been a lot of fun, being able to research different topics, and then I'll be able to have you. Earlier today, I had an interview with Michelle Betos, who's a goalkeeper for OL Reign in the NWSL. A couple weeks ago, had Dennis Solanovic, who plays for Liechtenstein, and it's crazy how just being able to just find different people from different parts of the game, just devoting time. And so I just want to say thank you for having the time to be on my podcast for today.
No, anytime. That's the beautiful thing about this game is you can have a podcast that has people of all genders, of all walks of life, talking about the same sport. It's a powerful thing that I think it's really cool to see a lot of players, a lot of clubs, a lot of organizations using that power for good right now. And it's something that they're going to have to continue to do, because I've always felt like sport can change the world, and specifically soccer can. Soccer needs to be at the forefront of changing the world right now. And hopefully with leagues and games coming back in this country, things happening around the world with the game, it can continue to get better and better.
For sure, because soccer, it's the world's most popular sport, has the most popular tournament in the World Cup every 4 years. And it usually, whenever teams do well, it can definitely unite the country into one. If there's any problems going on, everybody can at least have something in common, hoping that their national team does well or their club team does well. And yeah, I totally agree.
It's the beautiful thing about it. And I really hope that with MLS coming back, in July, with USL Championship, USL League One talking about coming back, colleges coming back, youth clubs coming back, I hope that soccer can be a big part of things getting back to normal, or the new normal, or creating a new normal, whatever it is, because none of us really know right now. I hope soccer is a big part of the positive things that occur.
I hope so too. We just got to take it a day at a time. But I want to, I'll say, Jason, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. I know you have another show coming up later this evening, so I don't want to take any more time. But I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Anytime you want to dig into Atlanta soccer history, give me a call.
Oh yeah, will do. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.
Yeah.